The Reverend Sarah Jones, an alumna of St. Hugh's College, who is currently priest in charge of the city parish of St. John the Baptist, Cardiff. Sarah, welcome. It's good to see you. Very good to have you. Sarah transitioned while a student here reading psychology, am I right?
True.
And she eventually became the Church of England's first transgender priest, depending upon how one defines first and so forth. You can tell us more about that. And Sarah spoke to us in chapel last evening to a very full crowd, a wonderful crowd, not only from our college but from across the university. Lots of people came to hear you. And our principal, by the way, told me this morning, she stopped me in the hallway, and she said that one person said it was the best sermon they had ever heard. So I'll try hard not to take offense to that. Thank you very much. It was wonderful, I have to say. It's so lovely, again, to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to sit down and talk with me about your story, some of which you shared last evening, and about human sexuality, including matters of gender, which are very much in the news and on the minds of people in society, and not least in the Church of England, in which you were originally ordained. And so to begin, Sarah, I wonder, would you please just tell a bit of your story, as you shared last evening, in a few minutes or so, and we'll go from there.
Okay, sure, Shaun. Well, thank you very much for having me back. It's been great to be back to college. I love very much. Well, I always knew there's something different about me, and when I went to primary school, I really was more one of the girls than one of the boys. I never said anything at that time. It was the 1960s, and these things weren't really talked about, and I was still trying to work it out, really. I didn't know that it would be a defining issue in my life or anything. And then secondary school, same thing, it got a little sharper. But actually, I thought probably I just had a feminine side, and that was all very manageable. I had a girlfriend for quite a while. We got on really well. We were going so steady that I mentioned it to her. I had to talk about it. She said it was, we thought we could handle it, and it was not a big issue. We got married, it was great, but actually the marriage didn't work because, she said it was a bit like living with a woman, and she wasn't a gay woman, and so it had to end. That was very difficult. I was in my mid-20s by that point, and overnight this became the biggest single issue in my life, Could I carry on trying to live as a guy? And the short answer was no. I went to the doctor, I went to my local priest because I've always been religious. And I had to really square it with God. If I thought God had made me a man, could I change that? Would it be sinful and wicked? So through a lot of thinking, the end result was I figured that God hadn't made me a man. He'd made me a person, and whatever had happened, but that I was really needing to make a gender change. So I quit work at 28. I did A-levels with 16-year-olds, went back to college, and at 30 I finished my last A-level, packed up my old clothes, and before coming to St. Hugh's, made a kind of social change, if you like, just to see if it would work. Pretty nervy at first, but after the first 2 or 3 days, it all settled down, and I pitched up here about 10 weeks later for the start of Michaelmas term.
Very good. Thank you very much. And taking from your address last evening, it sounds as if faith, as you just said, has been a major part of your life story. And it didn't sound as if to me last evening, your gender explorations had any real negative impact on your faith. Am I right or not? And what would you say about that?
No, absolutely right. It never caused me to doubt God. I always believed there was a God. My job as someone who was seeking after God was to try and find what I could and could not do. Could I make a gender change? And also, was there anything in the scriptures that comforted me in my present situation? There were nights when I just turned the Bible open and just kept looking for things. The Psalms, of course, are obvious things to look to. And no, I always felt actually that God was carrying me through it. And however, it's a bit like Psalm 71, really. This bit about that people may kind of call at you and have goes at you. God is my helper and my strength. So, no, the religious aspect of things carried me through. And on my very first morning before breakfast, I came into St. Hugh's Chapel, and I just said morning prayer on my own. And I thought, okay, God, please let this go all right. And I tumbled down into breakfast.
good. And tell me, Sarah, about your ordination. You were, again, depending on how we define first, the first transgender priest in the Church of England. This must have, did it, or I should think it must have caused obstacles for some people.
Yeah.
I mean, tell me a bit about that, about your ordination, about how that transpired.
Sure. Well, the church had people who had transitioned later in life. So there's been priests and then transitioned. I was the first person that they accepted for training, having made a transition. And the church always knew about that. The hierarchy, the people involved who needed to know always knew about it. There was some debate, even while I was going through theological college, if the mood changed. They could actually just decide they didn't want to ordain me. But anyway, I got ordained in 2004. That was fine. The more difficult one, because you're ordained deacon one year and priested the next. In between the two things, I've been outed very deliberately by someone in the media. It had hit the press, so when I came to be priested, on the morning of my ordination, the Evangelical Alliance were on Radio 4's Today programme, and in other places saying that I should not be priested and that you can't present as something that you're not. We did have a plan if there was a demonstration in the ordination itself. And just before we went into the cathedral, 2 Hereford police officers just walked down the road, not actually doing anything, but the coincidence was remarkable. I think they knew they had to walk past the cathedral. In the end, there were no demonstrators and it all went ahead.
It's very good.
Yeah.
And I wonder, hearkening back to your days at St. Hugh's, was St. Hugh's a good place for you to be? During which time you were wrestling with this issue of your gender and your faith and so forth. Was it a good place to be here at St. Hugh's, and if so, why?
Yeah. It was awesome. It was truly awesome. It had that feel, even on the open day when I came, of being a very caring college. And obviously, looking to have Oxford standards for academic work, but what a caring college. And the chapel community was great. The chaplain, Bill Fosdyke, was great. I had loads of friends. And I noticed that there were all sorts of people who may not have fitted in to society in other places. And nobody ever passed any comment or did anything about anybody. What I loved about it was, whoever you are, however you are, in here, it's all just fine. It was just truly a remarkable place, and well, it was the beginning of one of my love affairs really with this place.
Very good. That's lovely to hear. Thank you very much. So, what can people do to be more welcoming, to be more loving to people who are considering maybe even struggling with gender issues or issues of human sexuality in any sense? What can we do to be more welcoming, more loving, more accepting, whether we're people of faith or not?
I think, there's an awful lot of... we all have first reactions to things. About anything, propose a new bus route or anything. We have a first reaction. And I think sometimes with people in terms of equalities and inclusion and diversity, what I would say is don't go with your first reaction. If you have a negative reaction to whatever it is, if it's a boyish girl, or if it's a gay person, or if it's a non-binary person, or someone who just makes you think, oh, I'm a bit uncomfortable, don't automatically go for some heuristic which says, oh my word, this can't be right, I would say you've got to get to know people first.
As people.
Absolutely, totally, And then it doesn't mean that you can't then bring all your prior learning and your attitudes and your beliefs into play. But if you lead with them, particularly when it's a kind of slightly negative or I'm uneasy about this, often you put yourself in a position which you can't get out of, So I would say open minds and open hearts. And the one big thing about being a Christian, I'm sure it's for most people, don't judge. Even if you don't think it's right or you feel uncomfortable about it, who are we to judge? So I would say take the long view, take your time.
Very good. Do you think it's helpful for any such difficult matter, and it sounds as if to me you're describing something of my view, which is a kind of a scientific view. I lecture in science and religion, and one of my rules of thumb is not to judge a matter instantaneously, as you say.
Yeah.
Consider that you might, in fact, be wrong
Yeah.
in what you think, and calmly and rationally consider these things together with other people.
Yeah, I think that is true. And also, talk about scientific method. The scientific method is all about proving the null hypothesis. It's all about going after other alternatives, isn't it? And
yes,
you can never, with attitudes, you can never get the right alternative. There is no statistical test for that. But actually, just taking the long view, connecting with other people, and there is so much knowledge out there. I find that some people, I try not to speak about things I don't know anything about.
Yes.
Because it all makes sense in my head, but if my knowledge is small in an area, I've got a job of learning to do. It's not to say everyone ought to come down on the side of ultimate inclusion. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, you can take your time to think the issues through and get to know the person.
Yes, yes. And of course, what the history of the scientific method shows us is that we're almost always wrong about things we thought were so very certain.
Totally, and I mean, even my own belief in God. To be fair, I mean, I spend a lot of time trying to look towards the truth of God, and I'm pretty convinced that if I stand before my Maker, 99% of what I thought I knew will be wrong. Yes. I'm just hoping that Jesus says, "Well, good effort, Sarah.
Yes, yes.
Come on in,"
Yes, yes. And of course, for anybody wondering what I'm talking about the revolutions in science.
Totally.
From Aristotelian to, Galileo's views, Copernicanism, quantum physics, etc. And not that we're wrong about everything, not that the scientific method doesn't work, but we're almost always wrong.
That's right. Or there's always more to learn. And that's
better
true.
Yes, thank you.
It's true for theology and the humanities too,
Absolutely.
The great scholarship of the 19th century, some of it stands, and some of it needs to be moved on in the 21st.
Yes. Now, Sarah, the General Synod of the Church of England has been meeting.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware for the past week.
Yeah.
And for anyone unaware, General Synod is the National Assembly, of course, of the Church of England, approving legislation affecting the whole church, formulating even new forms of worship for us, debating matters of national and international importance, and not least even national budgets. Very important stuff.
Yeah.
But I did note, Sarah, that one of the very first matters on the agenda was the church's treatment of transgender people and welcoming or not people. Do you have any commentary on that for us?
I do have thoughts about it. I mean, obviously I need to be, until I got my new post in Cardiff, I was part of the Church of England, so I was able to sometimes criticise it with a small c, but still being part of it. So I need to be a little, now that I'm in the church in Wales, I don't want to be sort of saying unhelpful things. I love the Church of England, I have to say. I'm sad, I think, about some of the reaction to the Bishop's latest move. I think the Church of England is trying to, it always says we need to welcome all people, lesbian, gay, transgender people, fully. We need to, and the archbishops have said that for years. What the Church of England is trying to do is to give us a chance to affirm our baptismal vows in our new identities, or 30 years ago you made a change. And so it isn't really breaking new ground. I thought that was a very good thing and a small step for the church to take.
Yes.
Some people have reacted against it. They're entitled to their opinion. There's been a couple of things, though, that have been upsetting. There's been a couple of straw men, I think, being active here. A couple of arguments. People said, if any priest refuses to carry out this affirmation, will they be disciplined? And it was made explicit in the first set of rubrics, really, that no one had to do it. And then other people were talking about all the growing rates of detransitioning. In other words, people who've made a gender change and who want to put the thing into reverse. And actually the evidence, the numerical evidence for that, is very shaky indeed. And a lot of the people working in the field will say no, but there are a few people, a tiny minority of people, who detransition. But often it's not because of them, it's because when they made the gender change, they're not accepted into society and their life becomes really, really, really difficult. More often seen when people who were born male transition to a female role, and perhaps physically, they stand out a bit perhaps, and so if people don't accept them, it can be really hard, or if you're on the verge of losing your job because your work colleagues can't get their head around it. So I thought some of the things that were said before General Synod and at General Synod were rather hard, not the best informed, and it's a bit sad, I think.
Yes, thank you. I wonder then, is it possible to put a good face on the church in the light of such controversial matters? And is it not true that love for Christians and for the church must be the guiding factor in our treatment of one another? What would you say about that?
Yeah, taking the second part first,
yes.
Certainly, you know, when Jesus was asked to summarise the law, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your strength, your soul, your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. That was the summary of the law. And none of us can think that we're right about everything. And if you don't like the thought of somebody transitioning, or you don't like lesbian relationships or what have you, you may have your intellectual opinion. But there's no need to prosecute that in a sense. So I think love is the guiding principle. Second thing, I think the church synod is wonderful. I absolutely love it, and I do think that it is a bit slow and a bit cautious, but I know why it is,
yes.
And we've seen why it is in these last few months, because every time it takes any small step, there are people, most of whom are well-intentioned, who stand up and say, no, this is terrible. But, so I know it needs to move slowly. The thing it needs to do is not lack courage.
Yes.
Any organisation can always say, now isn't the time for equality. We did it with women, we did it with women's votes, we did it with jobs. Now is not the time. Oh, it's a good idea, but now is not the time. Well, you know, sometimes an organisation has to take the lead. So I'm praying for courage for the bishops and the synod. And, you know, I think no one gets what they want in life.
Yes.
And people who are upset by equality, I just hope they realise they can carry on being good disciples.
Yes.
Many of them, their heart's exactly in the right place. And they need to concentrate on the work they can do rather than finger pointing.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
I think you and I both, as religious people, we wouldn't say anything goes, would we?
No.
But what it sounds as if you're saying is have some humility about what you know and don't know.
Yes.
Make sure you have love for your neighbour.
Yeah.
And reason do things together.
Indeed, and don't believe every notion that somebody says to you. You know, there's a lot of stuff around at the moment which just simply isn't true about almost any issue.
Yes.
And so the fact that somebody has told you that the rates of detransitioning are getting high, you need to fact check all of these things. You really do, you know.
Yes. I wonder, what would you say to somebody today, Sarah, be they a person of faith or not, and maybe you can answer in both ways, somebody wrestling with the matter of their own gender or sexuality, or with the matter in society in general? Do you have specific advice for persons, whether they have faith or not, and then for persons of faith?
Well, for people generally, I would say, as far as it's possible, it's really important to be authentically you. So honestly, if you're a gay woman, or a bisexual woman, or a gay man, bisexual man, if you're non-gender, or non-binary rather, if you're asexual, go and be that gloriously. If you're transgender or transvestite, go and be that gloriously. Now, there are caveats. So, if you have a family, it may not be possible to do this. We all have to make compromises for each other. So, you know, if you have 3 kids and you know that if you have to make a gender change or if you have to question your sexuality, this can't be done on a whim. My experience is most people don't do it on a whim. They really don't. And I think there's a lot more people living with these sorts of issues quietly and faithfully and not actually bringing them to the surface. I really do. So I think we need to take care of other people. For me, you see, my decision was made for me. I lost a relationship. It was over. I could do nothing about it. So I then thought, well, I might as well try and be me. So I would say we do need to be ourselves. It does need to be tempered by our particular situation. No one would rejoice in a family being upset or torn apart. Having said that, I have seen families that go through a difficult time, but when the person is released to be themselves, in a lot of cases things work themselves out, and people accept things in the same way that if one of your children does something you don't want them to do, even if it's a big decision, you work it out, and sometimes the long view is the best view. In terms of faith, I would say actually, look, the Bible is more inclusive than you think it is. Christianity is more inclusive than you might think it is. There are some places you might go to who might say, well, we'll love you, but actually you need to repent of this. Well, if you're in that sort of church or in that sort of company, I can't think why you would want to stay in that sort of company. Go to your nearest Anglican church or your nearest church, if you're a Methodist, go there, that will actually love you and value you and support your journey. You have options. You have options. And I think that one of the lovely things about Christianity in England is it is very broad.
Yes.
There's lots of it. So if you're in a situation where you are, I was going to say being demonised, unfortunately it does happen occasionally, but where you are being looked on as doing something evil, I would say probably remove yourself from that and go to somewhere where they will help you explore.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you very much. We've enjoyed having you back here at college.
Thank you.
And hearing from you last evening and hearing from you today as well. Thank you very much indeed.
My privilege entirely. Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you.